Occasionally, a society's good intentions when put into law can have very unfortunate implications and result in significant harms. In this video, we're going to talk about two instances of this, one in the West and one in the East. However, before we talk about them, I feel the need to warn you that both involve very dark subjects, including suicide, violence towards children, and murder. So, if those things are triggers for you, I advise not watching any further. With that said, let's begin. Part 1. Suicide by Execution. We are in the village of Crumhard on the 24th of May 1704, where Agnes Katerina Schicken, a 30-year-old serving woman from Schorndorf, is leaving the village. As she walks, she spots 4 boys playing by the roadside. Approaching them, she asks for directions to Schorndorf. One of the boys, Hans Michael Furch, the 7-year-old son of a local cowherder, tells her that he knows the way. She offers him a gift and asks him to walk with her, which he does. The other boys make to follow along behind them, but she dissuades them and heads off into the forest alone with Hans. For the rest of the day they walk deep into the forest, occasionally encountering passers-by who will later testify to having seen them walking, talking, and sitting down together. Eventually, evening comes, and Hans wishes to return home. Agnes responds by throwing him violently to the floor, where he begs her for mercy and attempts to appease her by reciting his prayers. Initially, this method of self-preservation works. His prayers move her, and she helps him to his feet. The second time she throws him to the ground, his prayers save him again. The third time, however, they fail to move her. Drawing her knife, she plunges it into his throat. As he bleeds on the ground, she says to him, "May God protect you, you sweet angel. You are an angel before God." Then she leaves him to die. When she arrives in Schorndorf, she tells the first people she meets about the murder and confesses everything. When asked how she could justify murdering Hans, she explains that the child is now saved, and that she only killed him so that she can leave the world as well, as, she reasons, now the hangman will surely dispatch her. She is correct. 36 years later in Stockholm, Christina Johansdotter, whose deeply beloved fiancé has recently died, visits a friend and asks them to lend her their infant, claiming that she has an acquaintance visiting from the country and that she wishes to show the child off to them. Her friend agrees. Christina brings the child outside, picks up an axe, and swiftly decapitates them. Immediately, she hands herself in, declares her guilt, and, in court, explains her motives. Her fiancé is in heaven, and now that she will surely be executed for her crime, she will soon join him. Both Agnes Schicken and Christina Johansdotter are representative of the larger phenomenon of suicidal murderers who, largely throughout the late 17th and early 18th centuries, sought death via execution, which came to be known as indirect suicide or suicide by proxy. The reasons for this phenomenon can be found in the unfortunate cultural and legal context of the time period. It is well known that suicide was viewed as a sin by the Christian Church. Due to the nature of suicide, it was the sin from which no absolution could be sought. After all, after you had committed suicide, you could hardly go to a priest to be forgiven for it, and as such it was believed that all who committed suicide inevitably went to hell. So, if you were suffering from depression and wanted to die, but you didn't want to go to hell, you had to find some other way to die without being eternally damned. The answer was easy. You got someone to kill you after you had already been forgiven for your sins. All you needed was a crime which would guarantee you the death penalty with very little risk of you dying before you had a chance of getting your sins absolved, an opportunity which would be made available to you before your execution. Murdering a child ticked both boxes. Choosing a child victim rather than an adult also had what these suicidal murderers saw as an upside, in that it was a common belief that children would go straight to heaven upon death without needing to be absolved of their sins. So murdering them didn't condemn them to eternity in hell, and, as even murderers could be absolved of their sins, you were also guaranteed to go to heaven after your execution. Whilst this logic may sound astounding to modern ears, These murder-suicides were common enough that an entire culture of wearing black and white to the executions of those who had committed murders with the motive of suicide came into being. In 1754, a law was put in place in Sweden to deter the use of that method of suicide. It saw everyone suspected of committing murder with the hopes of getting to heaven forced to stand on the scaffold for 2 days whilst they were whipped. This did little to deter the phenomenon, and King Gustav III of Sweden even contemplated replacing the death sentence with life in prison for female child murderers, as the amount of sympathy they received at their executions made it clear that the intended effect of deterrence was not working. This is an example of how the Christian prescription against suicide, mixed with the dedication to the retributive justice of the death penalty in the early modern period, led to a cultural context in Christian Europe where the unfortunate implication was that murdering a child in order to commit suicide by proxy was morally superior to the simple act of suicide itself. The latter would damn you to hell, whilst the former would get you to heaven, and you would have saved someone along the way. So, if you were suicidal, you were better off murdering a child than killing yourself. This certainly counts as a legal and cultural situation with unfortunate implications, but it's not the only one, and the one we'll talk about next is far more recent. Part 2. A preferable cost. We are in Xialing in Hubei province on the 25th of November 2017. A 9-year-old girl known only by her surname, Tao, is outside her home when she is accidentally hit by a car. The driver, also known by his surname He, gets out of the car and sees he has hit a young girl and that she is still alive. He picks her up and takes her to farmland. There, he kills her, dumping her body in a bush near her home before driving away. 2 days later, the man responsible is arrested and admits to killing her. 6 years earlier, on the 13th of October 2011 at around 2:25 p.m., a 2-year-old Chinese girl named Wang Yue is hit by a van. The front wheels of the van run over her before the van stops. For a few seconds, the driver ponders his next move. Eventually, he accelerates, running over her again with his back wheels and leaving her there to die holding her head screaming and covered in blood. A minute later, a truck comes by, running over her again. For the next 5 minutes, she lies there as 18 people pass her, many making active efforts to walk around her body as she lies on the floor, occasionally moving. She is conscious and dying, and it takes until 5:31 p.m. for a woman to move her from the middle of the road to the curb, where she also leaves her. It takes another full 2 minutes after that, 8 minutes after she was initially hit, for someone to not only take notice of her, but genuinely try to help. Wang Yue dies soon after. On the 6th of September 2012, Hu Jun, the driver of the first vehicle to hit Wang Yue, is convicted of involuntary homicide and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. He also pays a part of Wang's medical expenses. Both of these incidences are examples of Chinese drivers accidentally hitting someone and, rather than trying to ensure their survival by taking them to a hospital, attempting to ensure that they do not survive. Whilst this is callous and cruel, it is also symptomatic of the legal context in which Chinese drivers exist. In Chinese law, drivers who injure or kill people in car accidents must pay compensation. Should their victim die, they will have to make a one-time payment to the victim's family. However, should the victim survive but be disabled, then the driver can be made responsible for paying for their health care. This could result in a lifetime of paying for medical treatments. This has led to a situation where, financially, it is preferable that should you hit someone whilst you're driving, you make sure that they are dead rather than risk the potential of leaving them disabled, which would make you liable for their medical costs for the rest of their life. This phenomenon is so widespread that it even appears in R.F. Kuang's 2017 novel, The Poppy War, set in a fictional version of China. In this case, it is Chinese law which has very severe unfortunate implications. If you hit someone by accident, you will receive a more severe punishment if you don't go back to make sure that they are dead, and you end up leaving them disabled instead. Part 3. Conclusions. So, What do Hans Michael Furch and the other victims we have discussed here have in common? The answer is relatively simple. They were all victims of the unfortunate implications of cultural and legal systems which enforced lesser consequences for more destructive crimes and greater consequences for less destructive crimes. None of the people who killed the children we have talked about had any hatred for those they killed. Agnes and Christina did not hate their infant victims. However, killing the children granted them access to death and eternal paradise, where suicide would have granted them death and eternal damnation. Hu Jun and He did not hate Wang Yue or Tao, yet killing them, or at least leaving them to die, made the difference between a one-time payment and potential lifelong financial ruin. Had Agnes or Christina, or the murderers of any of the other 50 or so children that we know died in similar circumstances to their victims, not lived under religious prescriptions against suicide, or in a society where the death penalty existed, they would not have killed their infant victims. Had Hu Jun or He not lived in a society where the financial implications of hitting someone and not killing them were so much greater than the financial implications of hitting someone and killing them, neither Tao nor Wang Yue would have necessarily died. Systems of justice should seek to prevent harm to society, not maximize it, and it is in looking to the past to see examples of well-meaning justice systems that have acted to increase harm that we can best avoid implementing similar unfortunate implications into our justice systems of the future. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to see similar, although not necessarily quite as dark, content in the future. Or, if you would like to support the channel, then consider supporting me on Patreon, which is in the link along with some of the sources used in creating this video in the description. I will see you next time.